And now, your go-to source for year-round fantasy hockey advice, DFS, and betting coverage. This is NHL Fantasy on Ice, presented by Skip, the official food delivery app of the NHL.
From a fantasy point of view, it was a jam-packed All-Star weekend in Toronto. Lots to discuss, brought to you by our good friends over at Skip. Welcome to another episode of NHL Fantasy on Ice. Part 2 of our Week 17 waiver wire edition. Nick Alberga and Pete Jensen with you. Anadua, we'll be back later this week. Pete, coming off All-Star, how are you, buddy?
Doing great, Nick. Yeah, Skip, of course, the official food delivery app of the NHL, and the city of Toronto certainly delivered. It was the one All-Star game so far that I've been to where it totally encompassed the whole city. It was a great vibe throughout, and some great news nuggets that developed on Media Day and that Wednesday night trade. So excited to get to it, man.
Well, Petey, I was going to say, you talk about deliveries. My goodness, our friends over at Skip are phenomenal. But we got 2 trades. We hate to see people lose their jobs, but Todd McLellan gets fired by the Los Angeles Kings. Lots of fantasy ramifications. So we're going to brush upon like last week's list again, NHL.com/fantasy, your waiver wire look, and obviously look at the unofficial second half of this season. But I think we should start with a pretty substantial trade ahead of the March 8th deadline, right? Elias Lindholm ends up in Vancouver, out of all places. What'd you make of that fit?
And Vancouver was already loaded at this All-Star game. They had 7 reps, including Lindholm, at the All-Star game in Toronto and the whole weekend extravaganza. So, yeah, Elias Lindholm is a great piece for this team, kind of like a Swiss Army knife, right, Nick? I mean, this guy is one of the best two-way centers in the league. Just a couple years ago, had a 40-40 season when he played with elite line mates and Johnny Gaudreau and Matthew Tkachuk. So I'm really kind of, salivating to see what this guy could do on a line with JT Miller or Elias Pettersson and or Brock Besser. It's exciting about their ceiling here in the Western Conference.
Well, first and foremost, I commend Patrick Allvin, the GM, Jim Rutherford, the president. They just get after it. And I like the fact that Vancouver was probably not expected to be in this position, but it's a tough league to win in. I think you look at recent winners, you comprehend that, and they're going after it. I think on top of that, Pete, I think the underrated story in all this is it brings some insulation, some protection, just in case something goes awry in conversations with Elias Pettersson, who will be 1 year away from UFA. I mean, there's no guarantees at this point this guy's going to re-sign, but I think everything is intertwined here, and it just gives him that depth to do a variety of different things from a fantasy standpoint. Obviously, you want Lindholm in the top 6, but they got some center options there. That's the one thing I would try to uncover fantasy-wise, first and foremost, when they play their first game here.
Yeah, I mean, Nick, you know me through the years. I always say a team has the best chance to win the cup when they have 3 strong centers, and they have the opportunity to do that. Elias Lindholm, can bring elements to the Canucks that they've been lacking for years, even when they've had a high-scoring offense and a great power play. They've been lacking defensively, so he can help Demko sustain what he started. He can help the defensemen, Quinn Hughes and Philip Hronek, really continue to maintain their production and not fall off a cliff. We've seen it so often, right? You saw the Edmonton Oilers after the postseason last year regress drastically in the preseason. The LA Kings falling off a cliff here and firing their coach after the All-Star break. I mean, that's really concerning. So, in order of preventing that type of regression, I think it's a huge move for Vancouver to maybe finish what they started here.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to expect a boost here for Lindholm. I feel bad for the PA announcer in Vancouver. You have Elias and Elias. I mean, that's going to be a disaster. Imagine one of those two factoring on the same goal here. But we're expecting a top 6 at least to start. They haven't practiced since picking up Lindholm, but Pettersson, Lindholm, Mikheyev would make sense. Suter, Miller, Besser. But again, there's just so many options. You can even go Pettersson, Miller, Lindholm up the middle. So I think you could watch for that. And I think it'll boost the first power play. Like Vancouver has a good power play, but not a great power play. They're 25% in the league, 8th in the league. But a move like this, I could see them boost into the top 5 here too.
We got a couple of fan questions delivered by Skip pertaining to Elias Lindholm. And I know last week we had Pius Suter, who had really been heating up on the waiver wire list. Would you still pick up that guy coming out of the All-Star break? I know Vancouver's going to be on a road trip here. Maybe Suter won't be on power play 1 anymore, but will certainly be productive if he remains in that top 6, I think.
Yeah, I think it would be less of an option, clearly, but more so, I think, from a DFS standpoint. If you're looking for power play exposure, I don't think it's going to happen. Like, you pick up a guy like Lindholm, he's going to be on PP1. So that's probably the way I would tackle that kind of conundrum, where it's like if you need a daily play and you need a guy who's going to get significant top 6 exposure. And right now, that's the way it looks, especially with Kuzmenko gone, and we'll get to him in mere moments. I think Suter's a pretty fair play. I just wouldn't expect much in the power play, would you?
No, I mean, it's probably going to be second power play,
Yeah.
if that. So we'll see. The rich get richer, the deep get deeper out in Vancouver. A couple questions pertaining to Elias Lindholm, Ryan O'Reilly or Elias Lindholm. That's tough. Ryan O'Reilly's having a great season in terms of goal scoring for Nashville. I would still go with Elias Lindholm there. And then another good question, Kopitar or Elias Lindholm. I might lean Lindholm as well. Again, there are going to be guys still in front of him in Vancouver's pecking order, but I just like the team so much more than LA right now.
Yeah, I tend to agree. It's very close, again, to what I always like to say about New Jersey, what I said last summer. There's only one puck to go around. There could be superstars on every roster, but I think as we found out very clearly last year with the New York Rangers, you can have 17 All-Stars. It does not matter if you cannot play like one cohesive unit. And I think that's the one thing you forget from a fantasy standpoint. A lot of egos in a room, right? And how's all this going to mesh for the Vancouver Canucks? But clearly on paper, it's pretty damn good. I'm with you. I would go Lindholm. I'm very curious to see how this looks in Vancouver, bulking up for the deadline, bulking up for a maybe a long Stanley Cup playoff run for that team. Let's not lose sight of the fact. Canadian team, Pete, hasn't won since 1993. Speaking of which, a blockbuster, right? So the Calgary Flames, I think, could be picking up the most intriguing, in my mind, piece in this trade, and that's Andrei Kuzmenko. He was in dire need of a change of scenery. He scored 39 goals last year in his first year in the NHL, and I like the prospects of Huberdeau, Kadri, Kuzmenko, a top line for the Calgary Flames. I think without question, they were in dire need of a skill guy, and they certainly got one here. Do you like that fit?
I do, for a little bounce back appeal. I wouldn't go too heavy on him right now, but I kind of like still, it's weird to say it, but the top 9 forward group in Calgary, even after losing Lindholm, is not half bad, right? Connor Zary is third, I think, tied for third among rookies in points per game behind Bedard and Leo Carlsson. So he'll be elevated. Kadri will be elevated. He's had a really nice season of category coverage as per usual. And then Backlund has been great this season on a line with Mangiapane and Blake Coleman, who has 20 goals. Sharon Govich has 20 goals. Like maybe Sharon Govich dips a little bit, but I would take a flyer on Kuzmenko. I know we got a fan question, Kuzmenko or Arturi Lehkonen. I would certainly side with Lehkonen there based on his potential for the rest of the season. But, you know, Calgary is not going to completely bow out here.
I agree. I'm actually going Kuzmenko with that question, by the way. I think Colorado's got so much depth in the way things situate right now. I just don't think Lehkonen's going to get that exposure that he's looking for with the likes of McKinnon and Rantanen and those guys specifically in the top 6. So maybe I feel a bit more bullish than most people on Kuzmenko. And the big story here with this file too, Pete, like he had a 27.3 shooting percentage last year. Dips all the way to 12.7 this year. Mm-hmm. I'm still trying to quantify and figure out what went wrong in the last year. And maybe it's Rick Tocchet, and I know some people are just not going to mesh together. But I don't know how you score 39 goals in the league and then you're a healthy scratch the year after. So again, if you talk about somebody who needed a change of scenery, it was Andrei Kuzmenko. And I think from the Calgary perspective, we all know they're going to sell. They're unlikely to make the Stanley Cup playoffs. The pressure's going to be off in terms of winning with that market. And I could easily see a Kuzmenko get back into the conversation of being a bona fide top 6 player. Like he's fallen out of favor. But again, you don't just come in this league and score, pretty much 40 goals. So I like this guy a lot, and I think a lot of people are not going to jump to own him, and I will.
I mean, there's definitely been a fantasy fallout, but you got to give Tocchet the benefit of the doubt here, right? He's going to win the Jack Adams most likely. The team has gone from non-playoff team to tied atop the NHL standings with the Bruins at the break. It's pretty incredible. So, that kind of aspect of the Canucks offense certainly fell off this year, and now they're moving on from him entirely. But again, the team is significantly better. So maybe it was one of those things where he regressed shooting-wise. He wasn't bringing the type of elements to the game that were supporting the overall team aspect, and now he's going to be hitting the road and heading east to Calgary.
So I brought up on the podcast a couple weeks ago, if you remember, the Winnipeg Jets were hot and heavy after Elias Lindholm. So it shouldn't shock anybody. Like 48 hours after, they jumped the gun a bit. They pick up Sean Monahan, and he's going to slot into that top 6. An interesting fit. I think first and foremost, I think it's quite clear from a fantasy standpoint, this isn't Montreal anymore, Sean. You're not going to get those top line looks on PP1 and all that stuff. I could see a bit of a dip in fantasy value, but I do like the fit, especially if they go with a Connor, Scheifele, Velarde, Perfetti, Monahan, Ehlers top six. Not too bad. It looks like they have the replacement for Pierre-Luc Dubois, right?
Nemesnikov's been good as the 2C.
Yep.
Rick Bowness was saying that when somebody asked him about this trade, that Nemesnikov has earned that spot. So, again, it'll boost the overall appeal of the Jets. Still a tough road in that division going up against teams like Dallas and Colorado. Colorado just added Zach Parise, who's pretty old but scored 20-plus goals last season. So he's not half bad. He's going to be motivated. He's never won the Cup before. So even if you're telling me that Monahan's going to make a big impact here, I don't even know if they're going to get out of the first round. It's just the harsh reality here. So, yeah, fantasy-wise, I don't know that he's going to be on power play 1 anymore, and that's where he did so much of his damage this year. But the Jets are bottom 10 in the league in power play percentage, so maybe he helps them a little bit in that area.
It's a fascinating move, and again, I respect Winnipeg and Vancouver specifically because they were two teams that we thought were middling teams that would be fighting for a playoff spot. And I love when a GM rewards his team for playing really well and understands the moment. Like Winnipeg specifically, you have Connor Hellebuck having a Vezina-worthy season. Your PLD trade has worked out. Like, spice the room up, give them a boost, and I think they have. But from a fantasy standpoint, again, I think obviously way more value in the Lindholm pickup with Vancouver than Monahan and Winnipeg. But it's always interesting to see that domino effect, and I think you have to keep that in mind in the fantasy world too as to what could happen next. It could be that guy in Anaheim, Adam Henrique, right?
Right. I would love to see maybe the Rangers add Henrique. I know it'd probably boil the Devils' blood a little bit if that happened, but now with Hedel out for the season, like you kind of want to see Henrique go to a championship contender. I don't think the Rangers are going to win the Cup this year, but he could certainly help them get there and come out of the East. East is a little weaker than it's been in recent years. And back to Winnipeg, wanted to just give them a shout out because coming into the season, I didn't have them in the playoffs. I didn't know if they were going to keep or be able to keep Hellebuck or Mark Scheifele. They kept both. They've been a huge surprise. Bowness is one of the best coaches in the league, and they've kind of taken that narrative that like, oh, nobody wants to play in Winnipeg. That's not exactly true. I'm sure Sean Monahan, who's resurrected his career here, is pretty stoked to be joining this pretty deep roster in Winnipeg.
I think, especially somebody like Sean Monahan's been through so much in his career, he just wants to try and win, and I think he's going to get that opportunity here with the Winnipeg Jets. Speaking of which, Pete, I still can't believe we're about to have this conversation, given what we said about this franchise 2 months ago on this podcast. Todd McLellan, relieved of his duties. It's a growing trend in this league. You win a game after a massive losing streak, your job is cooked. He loses after beating the Nashville Predators, loses his job. Jim Hiller comes in, interim head coach, had spent a couple years as assistant there in LA. The sixth head coach fired this season. And I get it. I mean, expectations pretty high there in Los Angeles. 3-8-6 in the last 17 games. But Jim Hiller, the interim head coach in Los Angeles, your thoughts?
I worry more about the roster construction and stuff. I like a lot of their players. They've had some injuries this year. Of course, the Arvidsson injury hasn't played since many moons ago. But, I just worry about like the thing that Doughty said, like too many of these guys are concerned about getting their points and not about the team's trajectory and stuff like that. So, the guy was from in-house, Hiller, so
yeah,
maybe he makes some tweaks. We've seen this work out well in the past. The Kings really should make the playoffs at the end of the day, but yeah, just like the kind of how it all played out, winning before the break, starting David Riddick in that game, then Cam Talbot's in the All-Star game, from his performance earlier in the season. And I asked him about Hiller. He didn't want to talk about it. He was having a positive weekend, but
you would.
Yeah, it's kind of a mess in LA right now.
Yeah.
That's what I would say. I would say it's so sloppy the way this all went down between the vote of confidence, getting the win with Nashville, then out during the All-Star break. And the guy that really needs to take the blame here and really needs to step up his game, Nick, from fantasy, real life, is PLD, because the guy's been a disaster. And his attitude seems to be an issue here. Every single stop he's made, it seems to be a bit of an issue.
Bobby, that was like Celine Dion handing the award to Taylor Swift at the Grammys. But I can acknowledge you because I had PLD on my list of notes to talk about. Yeah, that's the big thing for me, guys. Like, talk about the goaltending all you want in LA. Like, some of the guys have been up and down, but you pick up PLD to be a top 6 fixture. He's on pace, Pete, for 17 goals and 34 points. Like, to me, it starts and ends there, and you don't want to pin it just on one player, but you need to extract the most out of your players, fantasy or reality, and PLD is just not playing good enough, especially considering what they're paying him. I would certainly start there in the combo.
Yeah, and they've gotten there's been some success stories in LA this year.
Yeah.
Trevor Moore has been like a borderline top 50 overall fantasy player this season with the shots on goal and the goals and playing in a secondary role and just killing it. Talbot, they signed to a 1-year deal. That was one of those things. They came into the year, we didn't love their goaltending, but they got probably more than their money's worth out of Cam Talbot on that short-term contract. So now where do they take it from here? Probably going to have to make a move at the deadline to either beef up that defense. I know they're always been linked to Jacob Chychrun. Maybe they try to find a way to make that happen this year.
Yeah, the other thing I would look at, I think it's quite clear. I mean, they need some help in between the pipes. Like, with all due respect to Big Save Dave Riddick, who's the backup, I guess, right now. Like, they need to add some depth. I wouldn't be shocked if they look at like a Jake Allen, but I think it's such an easy narrative to overplay right now that, hey, they came in with Talbot, Copley, Riddick, and they thought they were serious. Well, 2 months ago, they were very serious. Everybody on this podcast was very high on that team, and now all of a sudden they can't get a save, can't get a victory. But to me, again, PLD is the file I'm looking at. Like, I think if you want to buy right now, now's the opportunity. Because, I mean, we've seen a large enough sample size, Pete, to say he's a top 100 fantasy file year in and year out if you average his career. Like, I think it's obviously a risky proposition, and I think a flyer worth taking, in my opinion, right now because of the body of work of the player, no?
Right, and he's had a bunch of 60-point seasons. His career high is only 63, but it was in 73 games. So, coming into the year, like with that big contract he got after the trade, it's like, you were expecting a new level of production. You were expecting like 75-plus points. You were expecting like 250 shots. You're expecting 20, 25 power play points at the least, and you're not getting any of those right now in terms of his on-pace stats. So I'm probably just fading him. If he produces for like a month or so, maybe I would consider trading for him. But again, it's a kind of polarizing storyline with that guy. Always seems to want to play on a different team every 2 years.
Yeah, and unfortunately, a lot of his shifts in his NHL career at times look like Nikita Kucherov did in the skills competition. Just not good. We move on here, Pete. Some players eyeing a return. Let's start in Carolina because I think this is fascinating. I think all three of us agree that they're a legitimate Stanley Cup contender. They need their number one goalie back. Freddie Andersen's cleared to begin on-ice conditioning. So right away it's like Pyotr Kochetkov has earned a full-time roster spot, right? I think we should start there. Like, I think we end that conversation finally, right? This means Ranta's going once Andersen's back, no?
I would think so. They already waived him earlier in the year. Kochetkov has been awesome. Arguably, the second-best rookie in terms of his stats relative to his position so far this year. So, yeah, I'd love to see them go with the tandem of Kochetkov and Freddie come playoff time. So, good injury news development for Freddie. Has been really good in the regular season, a couple years running now.
Big time. Some other news and notes here as we move on. Some players eyeing a return as soon as this week. William Karlsson, Mark Scheifele with Winnipeg, and Owen Tippett with Philadelphia here, Pete.
Owen Tippett, I mean, that team has looked drastically different ever since he's been out. I know, the Carter Hart situation is unfortunate. They're rolling with Samuel Ersson probably for the rest of the season here, but I think Owen Tippett, gets them back into that conversation the second he gets back with teams like the Devils. Of course, heading into the Stadium Series, that's going to be interesting to note. The Islanders have some upside, but I'm not sold on them either. The Detroit Red Wings, brutal loss before the break against the Ottawa Senators. You got to do better than that, guys. So, I think there's an opening for the Devils here and certainly an opening for the Flyers to get into the playoffs this year with Tippett back.
By the way, producer Bob, a mental bookmark for this show to take the under in the 6 games before the All-Star break. I don't know what that was last week, but the under was hidden significantly.
I'm writing it on the chalkboard for future seasons. Good point. It's on the chalkboard, Nick.
1-0 hockey across the board. I didn't even realize there were games last week, but great to see. And I think you make a good point on Philadelphia, Pete. I've never been able to be there with you this year, and that continues. With all due respect to Sam Harrison, he's not Carter Hart. And I think other teams are coming behind him. Like, I don't view Philadelphia as a team that's going to add to bolster their roster, right? If anything, I think they're going to pick up the phone and take calls on guys like Sealer and Walker and Scott Lawton. Like, I think they could lose players off that roster, and I think Philadelphia is okay with that. Let's not lose sight of the fact that they were a team that was one of the worst teams in the NHL last year. It's been a great story, but I don't think they're there yet, and I think they're okay with that.
Right. If they do fall off here, I mean, they've exceeded everybody's expectations for this year, and they're building in the right direction for the future, even if they, tank it from here. I don't think they will under Tortorella, but
Agreed.
It's a possibility with how they've been sliding lately. I know Patrick Kane could come back after the break, so maybe, that gives you an incentive to buy in on Detroit. I know I was just, messing with them a little bit here after a bad loss, but that could take them over the hump into the playoffs to end their drought. And then also William Karlsson skated on Sunday. That was a pleasant sight. And I guess he's expected to return against Edmonton on Tuesday. That could be the game of the year so far in the season, with Edmonton rolling 16 straight wins and Vegas trying to ruin their streak and prevent them from NHL history here after beating them in the playoffs last year.
Again, I'm going to bring in the well-rested producer Bob Bender for this. How you feeling? I mean, Edmonton, are they ever going to lose again? This could be a spot, Bobby.
If you're looking to fade Edmonton on this streak, why not do it against the defending Stanley Cup champs in Vegas? I know they've had their issues this year. I'm actually rooting for Edmonton to get there, but listen, it's tough to win that many games in a row, and now you're going up against Vegas off the All-Star break. Connor McDavid, Draisaitl were just there. I mean, up in Toronto having a great time, so maybe this is the spot to take Vegas.
So Adin Hill came back a couple of weeks ago, has looked great so far. William Karlsson's coming back. Eventually, you would hope Jack Eichel and Shea Theodore come back. Is this an opportunity while the other teams in the West are making moves? Like, of course, Vancouver, they're at a high point right now. Maybe could come back down to earth. Edmonton's at a high point right now. If any of those teams run into Vegas in the playoffs, I mean, Vegas has a great chance to spoil their season. They're just a daunting opponent. That Pacific is so tough. I think you could maybe buy low on the Golden Knights right now.
I like it. I like it. Again, it's like out of sight, out of mind. Again, 2 months ago, we were talking about LA. You sort of forget about the Vegas Golden Knights. This is what they do every year. Hot start, so middle, and they pick it up at the end. They go on a bit of a run in the Stanley Cup playoffs. Like, that's the one thing we've learned about that franchise. They do some stuff in the postseason. It just wasn't last year. So I think that's a really good point to bring up in general in that division is the Vegas Golden Knights buying low on that team. They're going to lick their wounds here the next couple weeks. And I'm curious to see who they add. Like, they're a hungry team. Not that every team's not hungry, Pete, but I don't think they're satisfied with just one Stanley Cup. Like, they want to keep winning and winning and winning. And if there's one team who's going to make a move nobody expects, it's probably the Golden Knights.
No, it's true. I mean, we've called them the evil empire in the past. They're always making those big splashes in the off season at the trade deadline, and now they won the cup. So now they're like looking down on the rest of the league and just kind of like playing with house money here. It's going to be fun to see them stay in the mix. I'm sure they will. They've been hanging around despite injuries. So Vegas is going to be a tough out no matter who they play, and I would want to avoid them. If it came down to like last game of the season and one of these teams was playing for, the division title or something, and you could maybe avoid playing the Golden Knights in the first round, you got to do it.
Pete, the powers that be have instructed us that they need a bold take to finish up this podcast. Anything we want, could be fantasy, could be futures, Bobby.
Bold predictions here for the second half, okay? It could be anything, like it to be focused on the fantasy, but, of course, fantasy and reality intertwine regularly, Pete, so I want to hear from both of you guys. And for the listeners, chime in. Hit us up on Twitter. Petey's always on the Twitter doing what he does, and the Instagram. We get your questions brought to you by Skip. So let us know what you think as far as bold predictions for the unofficial second half of the NHL season. Peter.
So let's get this rolling here. I will say that the Detroit Red Wings are going to make the playoffs. I'll say that Patrick Kane's going to have a great finish to the season, and I would say like point per game or better once he gets back. We still haven't seen everybody, in full force, right? Like when Kane was out, when Kane was there, Lyon was out. Larkin was out the first couple of games, right? I'm excited to see that whole group put together, and I think that they're on a better trajectory than teams like the Islanders. That's not to say that the Devils can't still get in. They'll probably jump the Flyers at the end of the day, but I'm expecting a big push in the second half for Detroit to end their playoff drought.
I also believe in Detroit. For mine, I'm going to go to the Western Conference. I'm going to go to the Vancouver Canucks. Guys, when's the last time a blockbuster trade actually worked out? Like where a team acquired a marquee stud and they won the Stanley Cup.
At least they did this trade in February, give themselves a little bit more runway. But yeah, they're setting themselves up for something like that, especially with him still being in a contract year and Pettersson still being in a contract year. They're in like cup or bust right now, I think.
It's to a degree. I think Vancouver's a fascinating team. I think they're a good team. Do I think they're going to win the Stanley Cup? No. Would I be shocked if they lose in the first round? No. And maybe it just speaks to the depth of that division, who potentially, in that conference specifically, who their opponent could be. Now, Jackie Redmond came on at least wanting to take my YouTube show /podcast and dunked in my face when I tried to compare Vancouver to New Jersey last year. She's like, well, Thatcher Demko, I get it, Jackie. I hear you. I don't know if you guys agree, but I'm a strong proponent of like you have to get punched in the face in the playoffs before you persevere. And granted, I cover the Toronto Maple Leafs. They've been punched 17 times in the last decade. But I'm a believer in that. Like, I don't think Vancouver, Pete, has dealt with adversity yet. So that's probably my bold prediction is Vancouver, we'll say, won't get past the second round. How about that?
I could certainly see it. It's almost like in that Pacific Division, you just like either bet on the lower seed or bet on a first-round upset for whoever wins that division because some adversity is coming for somebody.
I would say a bolder prediction there is they're out in the first round. I mean, we see it all the time, right? We see it all the time. What about this for a bold prediction? This is real bold. This could be labeled as stupid. I'm actually stealing it from that Leafs Morning Take morning show that you do.
Thank you.
Nick, that the Maple Leafs will be trading for a goaltender, and the goaltender will be UC Saros. How about that? At the deadline, they make a deal with Barry Trotz. I don't know why they'd ever ship out Saros. I know they have some goalies waiting in the wings, but they get a big package, whatever the Leafs can give up.
Yeah.
And they put Saros between the pipes. How about that?
It's amazing you say that because over at theleafsnation.com, I put out an article last week about why UC Saros makes too much sense for the Maple Leafs, but I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think they're going to have him available. I think it's an off-season move because he's going to be 1 year away from UFA. They got Askarov coming too. I just don't think it's a now move. But I like the boldness, and there is still egg on my face from last year when I said Vegas was not making the Stanley Cup playoffs, and Pete, they won the Stanley Cup. So the prediction game, not my forte, Pete Jensen.
I like it. I like Bobby going a little bit more bold than we did. Again, I thought about it, but I was like, I can't make another bold prediction about the Sabres or something stupid like that. So,
oh, boy.
Yeah, so I didn't do it. I kept my mouth shut. So they're about 10 points back right now.
Anna texted in, and her bold prediction is the Devils are going to be making the playoffs. So get back safely, Anna. We'll get you on later in the week. The Bet365 Action NHL collaboration will be tomorrow with hopefully Michael Lieboff to talk about all these changes in the landscape and what it does to the future prices and any bets that he wants to make. So that will be tomorrow, Nick.
Perfect. And don't forget as well, Week 17 mailbag edition coming up later this week. Thanks to producer Bob Bender. For Pete Jensen, I'm Nick Alberga. You've been listening to NHL Fantasy on Ice delivered by Skip, the official food delivery app of the NHL.